Hi, it's Captain Lobates here. I'm a technology and blockchain consultant for a French-British company called Argans, who are currently managing a project sponsored by the European Space Agency in order to investigate intellectual property rights in the Earth observation field. And the project is called Building Trust in the Digital Economy. So there are two parts to the project. One is a legal one and the other one is a technology one. And the legal one is looking at how intellectual property laws can protect both the data produced from Earth observation and data that is derived from that original raw data, and even products that are derived from the data. And the hypothesis is that there is a concern in this particular ecosystem that derived products and other intellectual property are not fully protected. And there is an element of truth to this. I don't want to go into the legal side too much because it's not my area of expertise, but there are these legal instruments such as copyright and trademarks, patents, contracts and licenses, trade secrets, and in the EU there is even a kind of form of copyright that applies specifically to databases. However, there are things in the Earth observation technology sphere that fall through the cracks. A clear example, for example, would be AI parameter sets. So there's a problem there in that they are difficult to legally protect. So the question then is, can technology come to the rescue? And we've got some evidence from the music and film industries that technology can indeed help. However, it can also have unexpected negative consequences. So, for example, you have digital rights management in music and film. However, it tends to operate on a combination of locked hardware and encryption. And in the Earth observation space, you can't really expect all the different participants to use specific hardware designed for that community. They're going to be wanting to use cloud computing services and their own servers in order to process data. So it kind of falls a bit short there. However, encryption may still be relevant. Another area of technology that might be useful is steganography or watermarking. At least it may seem so at first, because it allows you to determine when there is a leak of data, because you're giving unique copies, different copies of the data to different parties. You can track down which party must have caused the leak. But again, in the data processing field, people don't want to have corrupted data, so steganography kind of fails there. And the other thing is, all these technological protection methods can still be worked around, because there is a fundamental property of data that once somebody else has it in their possession, there is really no technical way to take it off them or force them to destroy it. The only true reliable method is to seek redress in the courts and get an injunction or some kind of legal ruling that says that they have to delete what's on their servers. So problems, but that's always good, because then we can look for solutions. So does blockchain make sense in the Earth observation field, was the question that I was initially asked to consider. And when you look at the community that is built up around data from satellites, Earth observation data, it does seem to have a lot of the hallmarks that suggest that blockchain may have a place. However, just because it has all those hallmarks doesn't necessarily mean that it is actually the right decision ultimately. We did some surveys, we sent out some surveys, we performed a collection of interviews, and we even had a workshop in order to talk to all the various parties in this field. So you have everything from the entities that are producing vast quantities of data, such as the European Space Agency or some private satellite operators, and in some cases the data is handed out freely, in other cases it is charged for, and also the data storage service providers and cloud computing platform providers that are specific to this field. And then at the very end, you have small to medium enterprises who are using parts of the data in order to either conduct research or hopefully at some point produce products that actually have value. And so you have whole different sets of parties who are interested in this space. They have different sizes, they have different influence, they have different financial budgets, and they are not all in full alignment. They have different focuses and different concerns. So when you have a community that is not all rowing in the same direction, sometimes a blockchain can actually help. But as I said, it's not a guarantee. There are more conditions that need to be met than just that. But it suggests anyway that this is worth investigating. So looking at blockchain as a technology that could assist this community, we identified 3 potential use cases that might be of value. And the first 2 may sound kind of similar, but they are actually distinct. So the first one is to provide the opportunity for data owners and data processors and product derivers to actually register their intellectual property. And the idea there is that there is then an evidence trail that says that this particular entity obtained this data or performed this transformation or aggregation or extraction on some data at this or that time. And the idea here is that this will help in a legal sense, in that it actually gives you evidence that can be produced in court if there are problems later. And knowing that that evidence is available and public and cannot be tampered with may give members of the community a greater sense of security and trust about the system actually functioning. So the second one was to register the provenance of data and the kind of supply chain style processing of data over time. And for that, again, you register the events on a blockchain, and you can use a Merkle tree in order to track what data was provided as inputs and what data was combined or what parts were extracted, and have a kind of web of hashes that represent how data has made its way through the data economy and the data ecosystem. So that is something that looked promising to us too. And then finally, there's a third one which is currently still a bit in a state of being some blue sky thinking, and that is to encourage an incentivized digital marketplace for this data economy. And I will talk a bit more about all of those 3 now. So for the first 2, with Argans, we are looking to use some research that is currently being conducted on coastal erosion, and in particular that uses Sentinel data. And Sentinel data is stored, or can be stored, in a specific file format called SAFE, that is actually a sort of container for not just the images, but it also carries all sorts of data about those images and checksums to ensure that the data hasn't been corrupted as it's made its way through various systems. And so using a blockchain and the cryptographic hash functions that are available to us, you can create a package of data with the SAFE format or some other format. It doesn't have to be SAFE, and register that on a blockchain. And there are initiatives out there that are doing this already, and there are even companies that provide these kind of notary services. But for Earth observation data, there are particular data structures and particular concerns, so it may be that it actually needs its own, well, not proprietary, but industry-specific notary chain, and there isn't a general solution out there. However, the other solutions out there should certainly inform the exercise. And then the other issue is that of identity, but again, we have toolkits out there, for example Hyperledger Indy, that allow you to handle how you identify parties on the blockchain. And the fact that you have verifiable independent entities and the digital data that they own, and it's all registered on blockchain, in our mind has potential for assisting in the support of intellectual property. The second case is the one I mentioned about using Merkle trees in order to track how different entities use different subsets of data from other entities in order to create new data sets or even derive products from them. And this is a bit like the way that, for example, Git works as a software source control system. It also relies heavily on hashes of changes in order to handle the integration of different snippets of code and merging code bases and tracking changes over time. So it's transferring that from a kind of internal or corporate perspective into the sort of public domain. Imagine it in a way as a publicly tracked GitHub that people can use in order to later prove that particular data had a particular provenance. So then a further idea was the use of smart contract automated key exchanges in order to have a verifiable timestamp for when a particular data package was retrieved by someone. And the idea there is that you make a request in order to download some data from a data provider. You do that over a blockchain. They respond by giving you a private key encrypted with your public key that you can then decrypt and use when you download the data package to decrypt it. And that data package is encrypted with the private key that I've been talking about the whole time on the fly. And that could kickstart the idea of this digital economy. And the final thing is, there are examples out there that we can draw on in order to form the idea of developing this ecosystem whereby the tokenization of particular data allows you to actually incentivize people to play according to the rules. And an example of that is the idea of, for example, Filecoin plus the interplanetary file system, whereby you can use the coin in order to buy storage on other people's disks, and people will allow the public use of sections of their data storage capacity in order to make a profit, because it seems that making a profit is quite a motivator for a lot of companies and people out there. But those final two, as I said, they're a bit blue sky, and there still needs to be a lot of thinking on those, but certainly the first two should be achievable in some sense during the final half year of the scope of the project that Argans and myself are working on for ESA, namely the Building Trust in the Digital Economy. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it interesting, and feel free to ask me any questions. Bye for now.